हेलो दोस्तों, बिगनर्स पॉइंट में आपका स्वागत है। और अभी हम कर रहे हैं पैसेज नंबर 2। फर्स्ट कर लिया था, ठीक है। अब इसमें क्या करेंगे, पहले पढ़ेंगे क्वेश्चंस को, पैसेज को बिल्कुल नहीं लिखेंगे। जल्दी पैसेज करने की ट्रिक। व्हाट कैन बी कंक्लूडेड फ्रॉम द एग्जांपल ऑफ द ग्रीक बेल आउट सिटीज इन पैसेज। इसमें क्वेश्चन में क्या कह रहा है कि इसका क्या कंक्लूड वगैरह क्या निकल रहा है, ठीक है। विच ऑफ द फॉलोइंग इज सेंट्रल आइडिया, सेंट्रल आइडिया पूछ रहा है दूसरे क्वेश्चन में। विच ऑफ द फॉलोइंग हैज हैव बीन आउटकम्स ऑफ इकोनॉमिक वर्स, इकोनॉमिक बारे में पूछ रहा है, ठीक है। फिर आ जाते हैं तुम्हारा, विच ऑफ द फॉलोइंग इज ट्रू इन द कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ पैसेज, पैसेज के बारे में पूछ रहा है, कुछ लिखा होगा उसमें। क्या क्या है, इट इज़ डिफिकल्ट फॉर डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज टू अचीव अ हाई ग्रोथ रेट एट प्रेजेंट, यूरोप नीड्स ग्रेटर इकोनॉमिक इंटीग्रेशन, पॉलिटिशियंस नीड to take the right steps rather than popular ones, anti globalization sentiments is quite high. Which of the following can be said about G20 summit in London 2009? Which of the following best explain the phrase, the danger is that a vicious cycle sets in the context of passage? Which of the following is the author's view of the refugee crisis? refugee crisis के बारे में पूछ रहा है, ठीक है। इसमें सिनोनिम वगैरह कुछ नहीं है, वरना वो वैसे ही हो जाते, वोकैब वाला सेक्शन बिना इसको पढ़े। चलो अब इसको पढ़ लेते हैं एक बार, क्या कह रही है। Politics is local, but most problems are international. That is the fundamental problem for national governments caught between the twin forces of globalization and voters' anger. The European refugee crisis, for example, seemed to cry out for a continent-wide solution, but the tide of migrants has been vast and national governments has been tempted to put up barriers first and answer questions later. The latest example saw Sweden introduce checks on those traveling from Denmark, leading the turn country in turn to impose temporary controls on its southern border with Germany. Anti-immigration parties have been gaining in the polls, with the exception of the German chancellor. Mainstream politicians want to head off the challenge. In a way, this looks like the same mismatch that has plagued the euro, a single currency without a unitary fiscal and political authority. Many economists have advocated much greater integration of the euro zone in the wake of the bloc's crisis. The European banking system would be stronger if there was a comprehensive deposit insurance scheme. The economy would be more balanced if there were fiscal transfer from rich to poor countries, but such plans are unpopular with voters in rich countries who perceive them as handouts, and in poor countries who worry about the implied loss of local control that reforms would require. All that the European Union's EU leaders have managed so far is to cobble together solutions such as the Greek bailouts at the last minute. Gone is the pledge of unity of the G20 summit in London in 2009, when leaders agreed on a coordinated stimulus in response to the financial crisis. Central banks are now heading in different directions. The Federal Reserve Bank has just tightened monetary policy, while the European Central Bank and the Bank of Japan are committed to easing. Trade creates tighter links between countries, but global trade growth has been sluggish in recent years. The OECD thinks that trade grew by only 2% in volume in 2015. No longer is trade rising faster than global GDP as it was before the crisis. International agreement requires comprehensive, which leaves politicians vulnerable to criticism from inflexible components. Voters are already dissatisfied with their lot after years of sluggish gains or declines in living standards. When populist politicians suggest that voters' vow are all the fault of foreigners, they find a ready audience. Furthermore, economic vows can lead to much more aggressive फॉरेन पॉलिसी। इसके बारे में पूछा था अभी क्वेश्चन में। इन द डेवलप्ड वर्ल्ड डेमोग्राफिक constraint, a static or shrinking workforce may limit the scope for the kind of rapid growth needed to reduce the debt burden and make voters happier. Boosting that sluggish growth rate through domestic reforms, breaking up producer cartels, making labor markets more flexible, is very hard because such reforms arouse strong opposition from those affected. The danger is that a vicious cycle sets in. Global problems are not tackled because governments fail to cooperate, voters get angrier and push their leaders into more nationalistic position and conflict which pose a threat to all. What can be concluded from the example of the Greek bailout cities in the passage? इसका क्या पूछा था? डी आंसर सही हो जाएगा. कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव सिस्टम टू ऑफ डिपॉजिट इंश्योरेंस नीड फॉर बी अफेक्टेड, जो अफेक्ट हो जाते हैं उनके लिए क्या सिस्टम है, इंश्योरेंस वगैरह का. Which of the following is the central idea of the passage? A unified approach to regional issue is unwanted and impractical. गलत है. ग्लोबलाइजेशन के बारे में बात नहीं करी, अनलाइक अमेरिका एशिया के बारे में बात नहीं करी. इंटरनेशनल कॉर्पोरेशन इज डिक्लाइनिंग विच इज डेंजरस. डी आंसर इसका सही है. अनकॉम्प्रिहेंसिंग और एंटेगोनिस्टिक फॉरेन पॉलिसी, an all-powerful single financial regulator for Europe, drop in trade volume. ए एंड सी इसका सही आंसर हो जाएगा. ठीक है. Which of the following is true in the context of passage? It is difficult for developed countries to achieve a high growth rate at present. Europe यूरोप नीड्स ग्रेटर इकोनॉमिक इंटीग्रेशन सही है. पॉलिटिशियन नीड टेक द राइट स्टेप, ये भी राइट स्टेप लिया है. एंटी ग्लोबलाइजेशन सेंटिमेंट, ये भी सही है. ये आंसर इसका सही हो जाएगा. G20 summit in London. It was organized to address the fallout of the financial crisis. Countries did not follow up with a harmonized approach to the crisis. Sentiments of unity were expressed at the summit. It was unsuccessful as assurance did not translate into action. All the given options can be said. G20 के बारे में कहाँ बात करी है? ये रहा. Governor pledge of unity of G20 summit in London 2011. Leaders agreed on coordinate stimulus and response of the financial crisis के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं. ठीक है, तो फाइनेंशियल क्राइसिस ये रहा. ए आंसर इसका सही हो जाएगा. Which of the following best explanations the phrase? The danger is that a vicious cycle sets in the context of the passage. Failure to sacrifice individual interest for common goods perpetuates global problems. ये आंसर इसका सही हो जाएगा. रिफ्यूजी क्राइसिस के बारे में, अ जॉइंट अप्रोच इज रिक्वायर्ड टू रिजॉल्व द क्राइसिस. जॉइंट अप्रोच हो ही रहा है. ठीक है, अब देख लेते हैं नेक्स्ट पैसेज नंबर 3. At a global financial services firm, we dealt with a long-time customers by mistake submitted the same application file to two offices. Through the employees who reviewed the file were asked to follow the same guidelines and thus arrives at similar outcomes. The separate offices returned very different codes. Taken aback, the customer moved to a competitor. From the point of view of the firm, employees in the same role were supposed to be interchangeable, but in this case, they were not. Unfortunately, this is a common problem. Experts in many organizations are assigned arbit- arbitrarily to cases. Appraisers in credit rating agencies, physicians in emergency rooms, under underwriters of loans and insurance, and others. Organizations expect consistency from these professionals. Same cases should be treated similarly, if not identically. The problem is that humans are unreliable decision makers. Their judgment are strongly influenced by irrelevant factors such as their current mood, thus time sense, their last food, and the weather. We call the chance variability of judgment noise. It is an invisible text on the button and on the bottom line of many firms. Some jobs are noise-free. Employees at a bank or a post office perform complex tasks, but they must follow strict rules that limit subjective judgment and guarantee by design that identical cases will be treated identically. On the other hand, medical professionals, loan providers, project managers, judge and official all make judgment calls which are guided by informal experience and general principle rather than by rigged rules. And if they don't reach precisely the same answer that every other person in their role would, that's acceptable. This is what we mean when we say that a decision is a matter of judgment. A firm whose workers exercise judgment does not accept decisions to be entirely free of noise, but often noise is a far above the level that executives would consider tolerable, and they are completely unaware of it. The prevalence of noise has been exhibited in several studies. Academic researchers have repeatedly confirmed that experts often contradict their own peer judgments when given the same data on different occasions. For instance, when software engineers were asked on two separate days to estimate the completion time for a given task. The hours they projected differed by 60% on average. When pathologists made two assessments of the severity of biopsy, biopsy results, the correlation between their ratings was only 61 out of perfect 1.0, indicating that they made inconsistent diagnoses quite frequently. Judgments done by different people are even more likely to diverge. The study has confirmed that in many tasks, experts' decisions are highly variable. Valuing stocks, appraising real estate, sentencing culprits, evaluating job performance, auditing financial statements, and more. The unavoidable conclusion is that professionals often make decisions that diverge significantly from those of their peers from their own peer decision and from rules that they themselves claim to follow. Noise is often deceitful. It causes even successful companies to lose substantial amounts of wealth without realizing it. How substantial? To get an estimate, we asked executives in one of the companies where studied the following. Suppose the optimal assessment of a case is $20,000. What would be the cost to the organization if the professional in charge of the case assessed a value of $23,000? What would be the cost of assisting it at $70,000? The cost estimates were high, aggregated over the assessment made every year. The cost of noise was measured in billions, an unacceptable number even for a large global firm. The cost of reducing noise even by a few percentage points would be in the terms of millions. Remarkably, the company had completely ignored the question of consistency until then. Which of the statement according to the author is or are supported by the matter of judgment as mentioned in the third paragraph? Long experience on a job always increase people's confidence in their judgment, but in the absence, rapid feedback confidence is no guarantee either accuracy or consistency. In most of the cases, decisions are guided by informal experience and journal principles rather than by rigged rules. In certain cases, medical professionals, judges, and executives have to take decisions which are beyond the strict rules that control the incentive judgment, which might not be noise free, yet acceptable to the सिस्टम। नॉइज फ्री की बात तो बाद में ही हुई है, नॉइज वगैरह की बात चल रही है, एकेडमिक सिस्टम की बात चल रही है, ठीक है। जजमेंट हुआ है बी और सी, इसका सही आंसर हो जाएगा। ठीक है। What is or are not the author's viewpoint in accordance with the paragraph 5? The author is skeptical about the credibility of the research works on the measurement of the cost of noise. The author is critical about the consciousness of the problem of noise as it leads organization to lose substantial amounts of money that often go unrealized. The author feels that the problem of noise is invisible and requires no action. बी आंसर इसका क्या हो जाएगा, सही हो जाएगा, ओनली सी आंसर हो जाएगा। What is the opposite of the phrase? Unfortunately, this is a common problem, as mentioned in the paragraph 1. Employees often constitute variable decision-making capability even if they are assigned the same task to perform. Even though employees are expected to come out with fair, positive and noise-free results, organizations find it almost an opposite and contradictory outcome to it. A major problem is that the outcomes of decisions taken by different employees in the organization often are not known until far in the future. If at all, employees have to follow the strict norms and rules of the organization, which often allow them to take rational and conventional decisions in the best interest of the organization, which hardly go unnoticed. डी आंसर इसका क्या हो जाएगा, सही हो जाएगा। ठीक है। What does the author means by the term noise as in paragraph 2? In an organization where work efficiency decides the potential of its employees, employees find it difficult to cope with their decision and most of the time they land up in variable outcome to their motive, which is termed as noise. Noise is a problem which is effectively invisible in the business world. It can be observed that audience get quite surprised when the reliability of professional judgment is mentioned as an issue. Noise is a problem associated with the decision-making process of the employee involved in the corporate world, which is invisible as people do not go through life imaging plausible alternatives to every judgment they make. क्या हो जाएगा, ये और दोनों इसके सही हो जाएंगे, तो इसका आंसर क्या हो जाएगा, सी आंसर इसका सही हो जाएगा। Which of the following statements can follow paragraph 4 to form a connection with paragraph 5? The surprising result of such research is that in many contexts, reasoned rules are about accurate as statistical models built with outcome data. Uncomfortable as people may be with idea, studies have shown that while humans can provide useful input to formulas, algorithms do better in the role of the final decision maker. Executives who are concerned with accuracy should also confront the prevalence of inconsistency in professional judgment. Controlling noise is hard, but we expect that an organization that conducts an audit and evaluates the cost of noise in dollars will conclude that reducing random variability is worth the effort. The major puzzle for us was the fact that neither organization had ever considered reliability to be an issue. A आंसर इसका सही हो जाएगा। The surprising result of such research is that in many contexts, reasoned rules are about as accurate as statistical models built with outcome data. तो ए आंसर इसका क्या हो जाएगा, एकदम ठीक हो जाएगा। अब आ जाते हैं पैसेज नंबर 4। Which of the following sentence does not justify the statement British is more leveraged than its counterparts as mentioned in the paragraph 1? पैराग्राफ 1 देख लेंगे बाद में। Which of the following statements seem positive? पैराग्राफ 3 ठीक है। और क्या है, पैराग्राफ 2 की बात चल रही है, ठीक है, पैराग्राफ 4 की बात चल रही है, कनेक्शन क्या है, यूरोपियन बैंकिंग एग्जिस्टिंग सिस्टम, बस इतना ही क्वेश्चन है, ठीक है। Russia is more leveraged than its counterparts. It is unusual in lacking a crown jewel around which it can base a business model, and it has a stack of derivatives whose prices are hard to assess in the market. More positively, it is light on the idle loans that clog the balance sheets of the banks in place, likely Italy. But in other ways, its problems have a very familiar ring. Deutsche is struggling to make a decent return. It has taken too long to face up to its problems, and the market it operates in is overbanked. Years after American banks were forced to clean themselves up, too many European loan providers are still failing as a result. Europeans prefer to blame others for the crisis that she has laced out at forces in the market for its most recent bout of trouble, but its shares had already fallen by 42% this year before news came out last month of a proposed Department of Justice DOJ fine of 14 billion for mortgage related scam. German politicians insinuate that the mooted fine represents revenge for Europe's recent tax case against Apple and American company. Yet the DOJ has slapped large fines on American banks too. Deutsche's vulnerability to shocks is the problem, not the shocks themselves. Fingers also pointed global regulators. The head of Credit Suisse, Tidjane Thiam, says his sector is not really investable. It is true that the rules have got much stricter in the past few years, particularly for institutions like Deutsche that have big investment banking branches. It is also true that ultra-loose monetary policy and in particular the negative interest rates that now prevail in much of Europe eat away at banks' profitability, but some banks encounter better than others in this painful environment. The IMF has compared returns on equity before and after the financial crisis. Those at big European banks fell by 11.4 percentage points, whereas those at American lenders dipped by only 3 points. Instead of blaming speculators, Americans and regulators, Europe's bankers and policymakers need to put their own house in order. Within institutions, that means reducing cost and increasing capital. According to S&P Global Market Intelligence, the average cost to earning ratio at an American bank in 2015 was 59%. Italy's figure stood at 67 and Germany's at 72%. Scandinavian banks already operate with much lower cost than their counterparts elsewhere in Europe. The Axis now swimming Commerzbank, another struggling German lender, and ING, a Dutch bank, have announced thousands of job cuts in the past few days. But more can be done. Pay is one obvious lever. Dutch bankers trousered roughly the same amount in annual compensation between 2011 and 2015, even as the bank's share price divided. And before shareholders complained too loudly about that, recall that in 2007-15 the dividend payments by 90 Eurozone banks amounted to 223 euro billion, 250 billion. Their retained income would have been 64% higher at the end of that duration if they had not paid out dividends. ठीक है, तो 23 का क्या हो जाएगा, खाली ये सही हो जाएगा, डेट says is willing to generate adequate profits to stay afloat in the market. So the market which Deutsche operates in overbanked it ये जो है गलत हो जाएगा, दैट से लॉन्गर ये भी गलत हो जाएगा, ठीक है। इसका क्या आंसर हो जाएगा? डी आंसर इसका सही हो जाएगा। विच ऑफ द फॉलोइंग स्टेटमेंट सीम्स टू पॉजिटिव? पैराग्राफ 3। European policymakers need to come out with strict and robust policies to safeguard its downgrading existence in the world market, that pointing fingers on speculators and regulators. Despite having bigger investment banking arms, the consistent downfall of European banks is a matter of serious concern. The prevailing negative interest rates in the many parts of Europe indicate that there is a ultra-loose monetary policy in Europe. Without winning, returns on equity of European banks are projected to fall over towards zero as a result of ultra-low rates and regulation as compared to American counterparts. ये आंसर इसका क्या हो जाएगा? सही हो जाएगा। What does the author mean by the statement that shape vulnerability to shocks is the problem, not the shock themselves, as mentioned in paragraph 2? That she is more prone to consistent failure which may have indirect effects on the market in the coming years. That she is losing its share values inadvertently due to certain forces in the market, which is surprising to German politicians. सी आंसर क्या हो जाएगा इसका? सही हो जाएगा। डेस्पाइट परफॉर्मिंग बेटर इन सर्टेन स्पेसिफिक fields than other banks, that she is finding itself in the midst of turbulence, which is itself has a revelation. Paragraph 4 connected with paragraph 5. Some European markets have been clearing away excess capacity. ये आंसर इसका क्या हो जाएगा? सही हो जाएगा। What could be the possible solution for the rehabilitation of European banks? यूरोपियन बैंक्स इन द एग्जिस्टिंग सिस्टम। तो इसका आंसर डी क्या हो जाएगा? एकदम सही हो जाएगा। ए और बी सही हो जाएगा, सी क्या हो जाएगा? गलत हो जाएगा। प्रॉपर फिजिकल स्टिमुलेट्स बाय यूरोपियन गवर्नमेंट्स would cut the chances that central banks have to keep interest rates so low. Using public money to recapitalize the weakest banks in countries like Italy and requiring them to slim down in return is the fastest way to return them to health. ठीक है, ये क्या हो जाएगा? इसका आंसर सही हो जाएगा। अब पैसेज नंबर 5 देखेंगे कल।